Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to another F1 Worldwide episode. I did kind of tease who our guest was on last week's F1 Worldwide podcast, and I'm very happy to welcome Amadi from KidsLoveF1 onto the show. So Amadi, a big welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm really excited to be on.
And so, obviously, it's great to have you on. And with the F1 Worldwide part of it, it's very good because you bring the worldwide element into it a little bit more. Because I know you were based in Canada, but just recently you've moved back to Dubai, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So, again, with me connecting with people, we've managed to somehow fit in some hours around and to make sure that it works for both of us, and chatting to you all the way in Dubai, and I imagine the weather is probably better there than it is in the UK.
Yes, I could imagine so.
It certainly was great, although you went to the Dubai 24 hours and the weather wasn't great there at all, was it?
I know, out of all the days in the year, that race had both days of rain, so that was quite unfortunate, but at least I got to see some of the race.
Exactly, but yeah, absolutely bizarre imagining rain in Dubai. Really, it doesn't really happen too often, I imagine.
Yeah, not too often, but I guess the weather gods picked those 2 days for some odd reason.
They certainly did. And obviously, there we go. That is a little introduction to Amadi as well. And of course, on F1 Worldwide, we don't just generally tend to talk about each other. We talk about a topic. But obviously, before we get into that topic, if you haven't already checked out Kids Love F1 channel, fantastic channel. Just kind of best way. What would be the best way to describe your channel, Amadi?
I'd say I give a good mix of my own opinion on lots of different topics. Also do some F1 historical videos, which are also very enjoyable. So yeah, a lot of good different content. So if you enjoy seeing a lot of good different F1 content, be sure to check out my channel. Yeah,
and what I would say, massive for Amadi, is you can tell that there may be gaps between videos, but whenever the video comes out, it's going to be of great quality, and you'll just really enjoy it, and it does add something. It certainly adds something to my F1 experience. So I always enjoy Amadi's video, so I'll be eagerly anticipating the next one of yours. But for today's video, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Renault, and we're going to talk about what the future holds for Renault. And so we're going to look a bit at 2020 and a bit at 2021. So going to start off with 2020. So I posed the question to you first, Amadi. What do you expect from Renault in 2020?
I think that it will be more of the same, because there is no team that is more focused on 2021 than Renault, and it's a bit of an awkward one because obviously you have all your focus for the regulation changes, but you also want to do well in the 2020 season, because if you don't, you won't get as much prize money, you won't get as many sponsors. So because a lot of the teams are going to have their focus on the new regulations and there aren't many changes for this year, I think that they're going to definitely be competitive. I think be stronger than last year, but I can't see them getting any closer to the top 3 teams, let alone McLaren. So yeah, I think that they're going to probably get around what they did last year, around 5th place.
I'd agree, and I think the minimum that they kind of need this season is 5th place, because I think you raised a very good point there in terms of sponsorship. was a really big thing for them to claim, and also their driver lineup in Ricciardo and Ocon, two very talented drivers. And if they are going to convince someone like Ocon with his contract ending at 2020, they're going to convince him to stay. They're going to have to perform, but I think we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. I think there's a lot of expectation at Renault, and I think themselves have said that they can't use looking towards 2021 as an excuse for the 2020 season. And obviously them and McLaren, well, they power McLaren with their Renault engines. That
up until that, when is that again? When does their deal end?
So their deal ends up at the end of this season. So McLaren will be powered by Mercedes in 2021. So I think with that basis, I think as a marketing front, do you feel like Renault, obviously they don't have to, but it would be really good for them if they could beat McLaren this year?
Oh yeah, definitely would be. Obviously, it would mean they would get fourth in the championship, and it would also be a really good confidence booster and show that everything is going in the right direction. And obviously, they'll be able to close the gap to the top three teams. I don't think it is maybe a top priority for them to beat McLaren. It would obviously be a big plus, but I think all their focus is on the new regulations.
Absolutely. And I think they had a 2019 season that wasn't bad. It wasn't great. They obviously suffered some reliability issues, but in fairness to them, a lot of the reliability issues they'd suffered in the past were mainly engine-based, and the engine certainly seemed its most reliable for a while over the course of the 2019 season. And I think the real big asset here is we'll talk about Ricciardo and then lead into Ricciardo and Ocon. The big plus here is Ricciardo having that year under his belt, and I think his mentality and what he brings to Renault, I don't know if you remember in 2019, he spent a lot of time talking about Renault didn't have the same mentality as Red Bull, and the type of interviews where he said he's really focusing on the main personnel and building those connections within Renault over the close season. What are your thoughts on how important Daniel Ricciardo is on the performance of the 2020 season?
There's no doubt that Ricciardo is definitely an amazing driver. It was a big signing for Renault to obviously get Ricciardo from Red Bull. And yeah, like you said, with him having a year under his belt, I think in this 2019 season took him a while, like the first few races, to get comfortable with it. But once he got into it, we saw those old flashes of the Daniel Ricciardo, who was late on the brakes, had those amazing overtakes. So yeah, he's going to be really good this year. And it's not only his driving. Everyone knows that he's a great driver, but I think that overall his attitude to, change the overall team environment, because I think that Renault, they are definitely under a lot of pressure. And I think having someone, not only Ricciardo, but also Ocon, two drivers that, that are a bit, I guess, less serious, if you know what I mean. It could definitely help the environment and lift up everyone overall. And I think that is something that McLaren definitely benefited from this season in 2019.
Yeah, and I think this partnership we'll move on to the kind of second part of it, talking about Ricciardo and Ocon together as a partnership. If it's right, it is one of the most exciting, and with the ability of Ricciardo against Sainz and Norris, you'd say that if they fulfill their potential, Ricciardo and Ocon is the better partnership, because Ricciardo is the best driver out of the four of them. So how do you think the battle between Ricciardo and Ocon will go? Do you think it will be a harmonious one like Sainz and Norris was last season, which obviously really benefited McLaren, or can you see some inter-team battles that might hinder their progress in 2020?
Thing is with Ricciardo and Ocon, I think they're very similar. They are both really likable guys off the track. I really like both their personalities. They're really easygoing. You can always have a laugh with them. But, when they get into the car, everything changes. They are both, the two fiercest competitors on the track. Ricciardo, obviously, with Verstappen, neither of them would back down. And it was the exact same with Ocon and Perez. So I think that they will get along. I don't think they're exactly going to hate each other, but they will have some fierce battles definitely on the track, because there is so much at stake for both of them this season.
Exactly, because, for Ocon, he still has those ties to Mercedes. So if he has a good season, but it doesn't work out for Renault, you never know. Mercedes might still come knocking on the door if to replace Valtteri Bottas, because I believe he's still managed by Toto. Then obviously George Russell is there, so he essentially is still fighting for a Mercedes seat. And with Ricciardo, one, he wants Renault to be his kind of equivalent of Lewis Hamilton's move to Mercedes, to kind of really pick it up and nail it in 2021. But if he doesn't feel it's going that way, he needs a strong performance to put himself in the shop window, that maybe if, say, a Vettel leaves Ferrari, that they might decide to go for him for that Ferrari seat in 2021. And so, he can move himself back up a top seat rather than feel almost stuck at Renault if he doesn't believe in the project.
Yeah, exactly. Both drivers have pretty much the same goal. If Renault works out, then they could obviously stay there. But if they feel that the program isn't going to succeed, they won't catch up to the top three teams, then they really need to put in a solid performance, so Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, they can look good for those big teams, and they could possibly get signed, especially for Ocon, because a lot of people have obviously been saying that, he's not at the top, the top tier level of Verstappen and Leclerc. I hear that quite a lot with him, but I think he does get way too much hate, in my opinion, at least. I think the fact that he could come in as a rookie and pretty much challenge Sergio Perez for those 2 seasons. I mean, Perez is a pretty top quality driver, and I think a lot of people are writing Ocon off. I would not count him out this season. I definitely think that he is pretty close to the level, if not at the level, of Verstappen and Leclerc, at least in my opinion.
That is very interesting. I know, like you said, the opinion of Ocon is very wide-ranging, to those who believe he is top quality, to those who think he probably is low on there. I think for me, where I stand on Ocon is that he has still a lot to prove, and that year out of F1, I feel, could maybe slightly put him on that back foot against Daniel Ricciardo, who, after falling behind the pecking order in a youngster at Red Bull in Max Verstappen, because obviously they'll very much say that they were even, but I think everyone could clearly see from the outside that Red Bull was Team Verstappen. And so with Ricciardo, I think he'll be very keen for that situation not to develop at Renault. So Ocon, it's a really big opportunity to showcase his talent, and I don't think anyone could deny the natural pace he had. And quick, I think, was it Spa in 2018? He qualified 4th on the grid.
Yeah, I remember that, and that really hectic wet qualifying.
Yeah, so very impressive there. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see, and I think they will get on as a partnership, much like Sainz and Norris, because their goals are aligned. I think it's easier for teammates to get on in a situation like this, because it's not a title, and it won't be a title challenging car in 2020. So basically, the better they can work together, and the higher points finish they can get, the more money they can get, more investment, which means for a 2021 they can take a step closer, and hopefully a really big step for them, in terms of challenging for the title.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that probably moves us quite nicely onto the 2021 for Renault, and I think this is the exciting. Before we go on to 2021, actually, we have to talk about the comments that came out. It's this week for us, which means it'll be 2 weeks ago when the podcast goes live for you guys listening. In the fact that Renault are claiming that their engine is better than Mercedes, way better than Honda, and a little bit behind Ferrari, which very big statement indeed. Would you agree?
Definitely, yeah. It definitely was quite a big statement. Not sure if it's 100% true or not, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think I saw Aldas tweet it out, and I think he got it spot on in his assessment of going, Renault, that feels like a 2015 to 2018 McLaren, doing a lot of talking off the track, but essentially don't talk about how good your engine is. Go and prove how good it is by its performances on track.
Exactly, yeah.
And if they suddenly, by surprise, can, what would be a real measure of this for me in 2020 is if either McLaren or Renault got within touching distance of Red Bull in the constructors.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of their engine, if they were able to get closer to Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, Aldas was 100% right on that one. Renault, they can't have such high expectations. They can't be setting those expectations, if all the time they don't actually meet them. He was completely right on that one. McLaren was always like that. I remember, back at the start, it was like, we have the second best chassis on the grid behind Red Bull. It's just our engine that's holding us back. Then when they got Renault engines, their chassis was the problem. So, yeah, Renault definitely shouldn't be doing the same thing. I mean, they certainly did that last season, saying that they want to break away from the midfield to get some podiums, but obviously that didn't happen. And now with them setting such high expectations for 2021, let's hope that this time they can actually, fulfill those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do always, obviously you naturally like to talk yourself up, but I think the Mercedes, although Mercedes sandbag probably a little bit too much, because I don't think anyone quite believes how they play themselves down at times. But Mercedes often go, oh, we're not that great. Ferrari are better, and then suddenly Mercedes absolutely dominate like they've done for the entirety of the hybrid era. That they never talk themselves up too much, and if there's any team on the grid who should talk themselves up, it's Mercedes, because obviously they've won the drivers and constructors for the last 6 years in a row. So yeah, Renault on that front, they very much need to just kind of almost zip it a little bit, get to testing, get to Melbourne and have a very strong performance and strong first half of the season, and then people can start believing what they say rather than them having to kind of big up what potentially might happen.
Honestly, when all the teams say this, I just completely ignore it. I mean, especially with me being a Ferrari fan. I mean, every race weekend, it was, Mercedes. Toto Wolff was like, oh, this will be such a challenging weekend, Ferrari are so quick. Then, it just ends up in a Mercedes one too. So at the end of the day, I just, I don't think anything with what the teams say in the preseason, anything that happens in testing, I don't think any of it is relevant. The only thing that is relevant is Q1 in Australia. That is when it matters, especially now that Ferrari are saying that, they're having a lot of trouble with their 2020 car. I'm not too worried because, last season they were quite confident about it and they ended up being way off the pace. So I completely ignore all the teams whenever they say stuff like this.
It does always kind of seem like a little bit of a media show, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Just the media trying to, make I guess, a shocking headline, I guess.
So I think it's kind of a good point to move on to 2021. Obviously, as fans and as teams, I think especially teams like McLaren and Renault in midfield, we have very high expectations for 2021 and what it might mean for F1 and the future of the sport in terms of closing the grid together. And Renault in particular seem a team who are absolutely focused on nailing those regulations, and they've got a lot of development going on behind the scenes in infrastructure in terms of, I know a lot of their aerodynamic department, they've been reshuffling and bringing in new guys. Obviously signing Ocon and Ricciardo was a very big statement as well, and the strange one obviously that led to probably the breakdown of the deal with McLaren was their kind of strange requests of almost working together to catch and bridge the gap, so sharing facilities and parts with McLaren, which for me as a competitive sports team never realistically was going to work. And what would then happen if they did manage to bridge the gap? How does they've almost had an inside look at each other's facilities, and it would feel a very weird situation. But obviously, what do you kind of make of Renault's preparations for 2021?
Well, I mean, just to talk about them with McLaren, I think that it is good and bad that they're ending their deal with McLaren, supplying them engines. I think Renault does lose. They won't get as much prize money. I think McLaren did pay them a little bit for the engines, I believe. Is that true?
Yeah. So they had a engine contract and supplier deal. So McLaren would have had to have done that. So they would have benefited a little bit. But I think they've spoken in the past that they aren't. I mean, you would publicly, but they're not reliant on customer teams with purchasing their engines.
Yeah, so obviously they won't be getting that extra money, but I think it's also good because now they can just focus on themselves. They're no longer supplying Red Bull. McLaren, sorry. They're just supplying themselves, so I think they can definitely have a lot more focus towards themselves for the 2021 season. No engine politics like we saw with Red Bull. It's just themselves, and they're going to have to nail these 2021 regulations because their entire F1 program is riding on this. This is their biggest opportunity. They want to come into the sport similar to how Mercedes did and absolutely capitalize on that regulation change. So, I think these regulations are pretty much all or nothing for Renault. This is their one chance to catch those top three teams.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It is huge, and going back to when obviously talking about them bigging up the engine, if their engine is as good as they say, and they nail it in 2021, it could be a massive advantage because Ferrari obviously supply other teams, Mercedes supply other teams, Honda supply mainly Red Bull related teams, so you could say they're the ones who would be on the basis. But if Renault has a really good engine in 2021, it could be a massive advantage and be the step that they need to beat their competitors.
Definitely, and I think that although I don't 100% believe in their claim that they're the second best engine, and they definitely are a lot stronger than they were a few years ago. I mean, Red Bull in the past they were always complaining that they didn't have enough power, the engine wasn't reliable, especially Verstappen, and also a bit of Christian Horner, but the Renault engine has definitely improved. They are certainly better than Honda. I don't think they're better than Mercedes, but we saw in Monza, Renault, they were actually really strong. I believe they got 4th and 5th, and Monza is a power track, so a lot of that must have been down to the engine. They clearly got something right with the engine that weekend.
Absolutely, and they also performed well in Canada. So in terms of tracks where power's more important, you know, there is, it isn't like a complete bluff. It isn't like an unfounded claim. There is actually some evidence there to support this engine's pretty powerful, and it feels very much so. And you can tell that with the emphasis, like I said, behind the backroom staff on the aerodynamic shuffle. I think James Key from McLaren is coming in to Renault. He's James. I think it's James Key, not James Fry. I'm sure it's James Key. But yeah, it just, you know, it could be a really big thing that makes 2021, maybe 2021 would be too much to in itself expect a title challenge. I don't think we can expect that drastic a change in the grid in that season, but in terms of maybe competing for podiums again, I think it's certainly plausible to think that.
Oh yeah, definitely. That definitely does have to happen. I mean, if they're still in this position in 2021, I don't think they're going to be in the sport for much longer. That's just my opinion on it.
It would, everything they're doing suggests that they're going to be in the sport for a while in terms of behind the scenes, the backroom staff, the people they're investing in. But you're right, if they have a shocking 2021, it could be enough to absolutely ruin the project and get it pulled the plug, because obviously Formula One is an very expensive sport to participate in, and if it doesn't become financially viable, and for Renault would be promoting the car brand and promoting obviously its sports car, a bit like how Mercedes AMG has benefited from Mercedes dominance through this period. If Renault don't get that sort of success, or don't at least make steps to looking like they'll be successful, I agree, you wouldn't be surprised to see them pull out of the sport.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, obviously they won't be fighting for the championship in 2021, but there definitely does need to be a big step. I think we can give some credit to Renault. Obviously, the 2019 season, it wasn't great. They regressed a little bit, but if you cast your mind back to 2016, they were pretty much at the back. So I think the progress that they've made up until now is really good, but now they need to break out of that midfield and really close the gap to the top 3 teams.
It felt they were getting stronger again in the second half of the season, and 2018 was obviously the strongest season they had since their return to F1 and its current thing, taking over obviously Lotus Renault. So yeah, if they can have a more 2018 and an even better season 2018, which with Ricciardo and Ocon driving them, they potentially look, because the main issues have been in the past, like we said, is reliability, and the reliability looks to have improved. You certainly can expect a good thing in 2020 to then build on going into 2021, and like what they want, really challenging for podiums.
Yeah, exactly. That definitely is the goal for 2021.
And I think what also suggests with Renault, they're hoping for this success. They've invested and have one of the best junior academies and some very exciting young talent on their books. On there, you obviously within F2, you have Guan Yu Zhao, which is certainly the most marketable. And if they were wanting more investment to make a step up, Guan Yu Zhao certainly would be he has talent, but also to have a driver from China and to really kind of be the only team that could probably tap into that market. With obviously, if China was still on the calendar, having a Chinese driver there, I think it would elevate and add something more to that Grand Prix.
Definitely, if he does turn out to be good for, in the best case, ends up driving for Renault, that could definitely, you would make them very popular in China. And it's happened with a lot of other sports leagues, including the NBA. The NBA is now massive in China because of a few Chinese players that have come, and it's become really big. So that could happen with F1. It would be really good for Renault, and also really good for the Chinese Grand Prix in general.
Yeah, and it would be fantastic to see on that front. And it's nice that they've got these youngsters on, and the only struggle for them is, unlike Ferrari, unlike Mercedes, unlike Red Bull, they don't really have a feeder team in F1 like a Toro Rosso, like a Williams, like a Alfa Romeo. They don't really have anywhere currently as it stands to put these youngsters other than promoting them straight into the main team, which is it's a little bit unfortunate for them in terms of promoting their youth talent, because I think we're going to get to a stage in maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years time where you've got 2, 3, 4 kind of exciting Renault youngsters knocking on the door and not necessarily a clear path into F1.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is, where would they go from there next? I mean, like you said, either promoting them up to the main Renault team, but that might not be great for the results, because if you have a rookie still getting used to the car, that you definitely wouldn't be getting the absolute best results that you could be achieving in that car, not maximizing the potential. And no B team to put them in, that definitely is a problem. So Renault, I think they do need to have a bit of luck. Let's hope that they find some sort of loophole in the regulation, because as it stands, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull are still way better equipped to deal with the new rule changes, because they can pour massive amounts of money before the budget cap does actually come into effect. They have the B teams, like you said. So I'd say it's still advantage top 3 for 2021. But I don't know. Renault needs to somehow figure out a way to at least get a really big improvement for the new rule changes, and then just keep going from there, I guess.
Yeah, I think where they've got to be like a Racing Point, and they have a bigger budget than them in terms of it's a spend smart, not spend lots. Ferrari are the prime example of they don't necessarily spend their money very well, but they have vast quantities of it, so they can generally fix problems when they come up reasonably quickly, because they almost have a bottomless pit on the budget. Compared to Renault, who don't. And like you said, you can imagine this year there is a huge amount of investment that I think there was a stat that Mercedes in the last rule changes in 2017 invested, and those were only minor, remember, I think increased their budget overall of 45 million from the previous year to kind of cope with the R&D development of it. So Renault have got to find a way of, they can't financially compete with that. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they can challenge that. 2021, I feel, just needs to be a step in the right direction. And then I think as F1 fans, what we should be expecting is the 2022, 23, 24 seasons, when that budget cap has been in play. That's when we should be expecting maybe some mixes up and changes in the grid.
Yeah, exactly. 2021, it won't change absolutely everything, because the big teams can still spend before the budget cap is actually in effect. But hopefully a few years down the road, we'll start to see some of the teams that maybe can compete before be able to challenge some of the top tier teams, because there isn't as big of a budget gap between them.
Absolutely. And well, I think we've probably covered 2020 and 2021 very well. So I'll finish off with a question and your kind of concluding thoughts on Renault. What do we'll pitch it over the next 3 years. What do Renault have to do within 2020, 21 and 22 to be a success, and to, a realistic success, and to push themselves further forward to where they currently sit in the world of F1?
You mean what would be considered as a success?
Yes. What would you consider a success? You, Amadi of KidsLoveF1, are kind of judging Renault. What would you constitute a success?
I would say regular podiums in 2021, winning at least 2 or 3 races 2022, championship contender definitely beyond those years. That's my expectation.
I think that's realistically the path they need to, and if they can keep hold of Ricciardo in the first couple of years in the regulations, I think and convince him in the project, which obviously is a big year for them in 2020. I think that's certainly a viable option. Their engine has improved. You can't deny the power they've got, and if they can improve their aero department and the chassis that they build, and just the overall, and if they can nail the new aero and ground effect rules and advantages they can get there, it's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds for them.
Oh yeah, exactly. I definitely wouldn't count them out, because in 2013, who would have thought that Mercedes, 5 years later, would be so dominant? Exactly. So yeah, I remember now scrolling through the comments of a video of Lewis Hamilton's first day at Mercedes. Scrolling through all the comments 6 years ago, a lot of the comments there was, Hamilton has not made the right move. This is just a money operation, not real people at this team. Hamilton made the wrong move. Look at his face when Button is winning in 2013. All of those comments, and look how good of a move it turned out to be. So I definitely wouldn't count Renault out. Mercedes has showed that something like this is possible. Come into the sport a few years later, capitalize on the big rule changes. So that is definitely what Renault has to do if they want to be a successful team in the sport. Yeah,
and I think absolutely for me, McLaren are an exciting thing going forward, but I think with their project now they're going, I think it's almost an expectation that McLaren will be challenging up the top. But I think one of the most exciting futures, because it could either go so well or so wrong for me, is Renault and Racing Point, to really see how those teams do in the next, like you say, 5 years. And if we were to kind of look back in 5 years' time at this conversation and be like, it would be interesting to see whether we were like, well, we're talking at the start of what Renault went on to start their dominance or success within the sport, or are we looking back at, it was a make or break time for Renault and it broke them? It'd be very interesting to see what it'll be in 5 years' time. Certainly will be. But I think that probably is quite a nice way to round off the podcast. I think it was absolutely fantastic topic. Really enjoyed chatting it over with you, Amadi. It was absolutely fantastic, and thank you again so much for finding the time to come on the podcast. really enjoyed it, and it was nice. Obviously, we've communicated quite a lot on Twitter and through comments on YouTube. It's quite nice to get together and put a video together and have a collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. This was a great topic to talk about. It'll be interesting to see how Renault does. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking about it. Glad we could finally do this. After I knew your channel for quite a long time before this. So yeah, it was great that I could finally come on here. We had a great chat about Renault.
We certainly did, and like I said at the start of this video, guys, if you haven't checked out KidsLoveF1, I definitely would recommend it. He has great videos already up on his channel, and I know he'll continue to produce really great content, really add something to kind of the F1 community. Love the kind of thought and effort that goes into his videos. You definitely know when Amadi puts out a video, there's been a lot of time and effort behind it, and the opinions and facts that he puts out have been very well thought out as a process. And definitely drop him a subscribe, and check out his content.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for the shout out.
No problem at all. And guys, if you've liked this video, you can give it a thumbs up, and me and Amadi would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on what we've discussed with Renault, what you kind of expect from them in 2020, what you expect from them in 2021, the Ricciardo and Ocon partnership, how you think that will develop, and how you think it may drive them forward or even potentially hold them back if it turns into a rivalry. It would be great to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below. And if you are new around here, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification, and you can keep up to date with all our latest content, just like this video. And if you are a fan listening out here, this is F1 Worldwide, the fan podcast. Obviously, Amadi has his own YouTube channel, and we've had, a few YouTubers on the F1 Worldwide podcast now. But obviously, we've had a load of fans on the podcast as well, which has been absolutely brilliant to have. So if you're a fan of F1, whether you have a YouTube channel or not, you are always welcome to come on and have a chat about F1 on the channel. And yeah, next week I think we have Josh Revel from New Zealand on, so we are keeping on Worldwide, and I believe we are going to be talking about Dan Ticktum next week, so that's going to be pretty fun and controversial, I imagine, to talk about on that aspect. But yes, thank you again, Amadi, for coming on. I hope you have enjoyed your time.
Yeah, certainly did, Mike. Really enjoyed this.
Superb. And I will leave you, and we will leave you guys, and there is only one way to round off an F1 Fanatics video, and that is, for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.